Thank you very much. If I speak at this volume, can you hear me all okay? Good. All right, well, I'll talk this slowly then. So many thanks to Max and Philip for organising the Politics of Love conference and for the invitation to speak today. I'm honoured to be included among such an impressive lineup of speakers. I look forward to learning from everyone here, and I have learned a great deal already this morning. And my agenda, my task is to explain why I believe the Politics of Love embraces animal rights and vegan, cruelty-free living as integral to its ethos. To me, animal rights is a way of life based upon the politics of love. Such a life as I have lived, mine, cannot but make a deep impression. My work involves witnessing every day the use and abuse, exploitation and killing of animals. While I'm no longer shocked at what we humans do, I'm surprised by our ability to invent new ways to do it. Most likely you're already familiar with the activities of what I would call the animal industrial complex. Industrial animal farming, product research, testing and development, animals and entertainment, and so on. I don't need to go into it here, and it would be just mindful, I think, to make a moment's thought to think about the animals undergoing research at Oxford, in Oxford. We construct many excuses to justify our abusive behaviour to animals. Essentially, it comes down to power and control over them. We exploit animals because we can, and we will continue to do so until we can't. I think it's as simple as that. My work involves trying to make sense of why we treat animals the way that we do. This includes implementing strategies and producing projects to establish moral and legal rights for animals. I also witness people helping animals. Their actions range from the mundane to the heroic. Film of their bravery is readily available on the web, and whenever I'm down, which it happens quite a bit, I watch ordinary people do extraordinary things helping and rescuing animals. They restore my faith in human nature. Humans simultaneously inspire me with their compassion and disgust me with their cruelty. It's time to confess. It's possible to live simultaneously as a philanthropist and as a misanthropist. In fact, I am a meso-philanthropist. There's a reason why my Twitter handle is The Grumpy Vegan. Today I will explain to you why I understand the key values of animal rights are truth, compassion, non-violence and justice. And I will assert that these key values are also the key values of the politics of love. I will conclude animal rights is but one item in a progressive agenda of social justice that constitutes the politics of love. This presentation draws from my more than 40 years of personal commitment as a vegan and professional experience with this international animal rights movement, these various organisations, plus more. So please indulge me as I share with you something about my life as I try to make sense of what the politics of love means to me, and hopefully it will resonate with you. I was born in a council house and raised in a working class home in Camberley, Surrey. I grew up with a cat called Tinkerbell. Her passing when I was about 12 was my first exposure to death. In the 1960s, my parents often took my sister, Wendy, and myself to Camberley's Main Street on Saturday afternoons for the week's grocery shopping. We would frequently come across a small woman with glasses and unkempt hair, white hair, tucked under a blackberry, walking her dogs. Her name was Catherine Ward, and she was known as Camberley Kate. I don't recall my parents telling me much about her, yet she was a source of fascination to me. Although I was slightly scared of her, she planted in my young heart a seed of compassion toward animals and an understanding of the importance of helping others. I went from Camberley to London in the 1970s when I became a student training for a career in the hotel and restaurant industry. I worked the summer of 1973 in a chicken slaughterhouse in Aldershot. This is not the slaughterhouse where I worked, but it's very similar. And this is the only gory photograph I'm going to show you. It employed about 80 people and each week transformed something like 150,000 live chickens into pre-packed and frozen oven-ready birds. I could never bring myself to watch the birds as they were killed. I also couldn't buy the oven-ready chickens that were offered for sale at a reduced rate as an employee benefit every Friday afternoon. Nevertheless, I continued to eat chicken bought elsewhere, naively believing that because my slaughterhouse wasn't where they were killed, I wasn't directly responsible for their death. When I returned to college after my summer working in the chicken slaughterhouse, I couldn't wait to meet up with Amanda, the only vegetarian I knew at the time. I tried to upset her, even make her cry at what I had been doing. Amanda and I argued back and forth about how and whether what I was doing was whether it was cruel to eat meat. No doubt I came up with all the stupid and self-serving reasons for why I should continue to eat animals, reasons I would spend the next 4 decades countering. Thankfully, Amanda was unassuming and patient and heard me out. Simply put, she won. She convinced me that eating meat was wrong, and I chose to become a vegetarian on January 4th, 1974. When I told my mother I was now a vegetarian, her response was typical of many parents when faced with their child's newfound zeal. Not in my home, you're not. Being a teenager of already strong opinions, I naturally interpreted her resistance as a fundamental challenge to my personal integrity. I was now an evangelizing vegetarian, a evangelical. I believed she should be a vegetarian too, and I couldn't accept that she didn't see what I now saw. After much heated debate between us about whether she should be a vegetarian, we agreed to a truce. Several months later, I broke the truce. You should be a vegetarian, I said. You know you should be a vegetarian. Why aren't you a vegetarian? To which she replied, when was the last time you saw me eat meat? She'd become a vegetarian, but had never told me. She wanted to see how long it would take for me to notice. Self-absorbed and self-righteous young man that I was, I hadn't paid enough attention to what my mother did or didn't do. 2 years later, we became vegans together, and she stayed a vegan until her death from cancer in 1986. So for more than 40 years, I've lived my life without causing harm to animals as best I can by not consuming meat, eggs and dairy, and wool and silk and leather and fur. I have worked full-time in leadership positions in animal rights since 1976 in Britain and the United States, where I lived for 20 years. My personal and professional lives haven't always been easy. It took time to realize my early animal rights activism provided me with opportunities to express the frustration, anger and confusion I felt about myself. I kept myself busy as a evangelical by campaigning for animal rights. I felt compassion for animals, but I didn't feel compassion for myself. And it took time for me to be honest with myself until I came out as a gay man during the 1980s. Animal rights were, I told people throughout the 1970s and 1980s, a political issue. The single greatest challenge, I said, is to make animal rights a mainstream political issue by getting involved with political parties and working from within. Join them, stand for election. In fact, I proudly said that I wasn't an animal lover. That is until some 25 years ago when I was adopted by a dog. A homeless chihuahua called Booba invaded my life and opened up my heart. I was a closeted animal lover after all. Booba helped me to become a more honest, compassionate, peaceful and just individual. And since Booba, my partner and I, we've lived with many rescued cats and dogs. I still believe animal rights is a political issue, but I'm now a card-carrying member of the Animal Lovers Party. There came a point in my life when I wanted to know, how did I get here? Why were animals so important to me? Is there an underlying ethos to my life? I made sense of my life by writing what became my memoir and manifesto, Growl, published by Lantern Books in 2014. Writing Growl forced me to confront myself, discover who I am, and turn my scrambled thoughts and ideas into, hopefully, cogent prose. This is how I come to conclude that there are 4 key values in animal rights: truth, compassion, non-violence, and justice. Watching Camberley Kate pushing her wooden cart full of dogs awakened my feelings of compassion for animals. Working in a chicken slaughterhouse exposed me to the shocking truth of animal exploitation. Working in animal rights organisations, I discovered the different ways we exploit animals exposed our violent behaviour. Reading, researching, and particularly writing Growl revealed to me the need for justice in our relation with animals. So there are, in my mind, there are 4 key values in animal rights: truth, the ethical foundation to our relations with animals; compassion, our motivation to helping animals; non-violence, the value in our relations with animals; and justice, our commitment to all animals. Not only are these principles more powerful in combination than singularly, but they're ones that most of us have already accepted for other members of our species, although perhaps only recently and still only partially. These values possess a certain strategic value, since they form a quartet that people who may not share our dedication to reducing animal suffering can understand. Indeed, I believe they form the foundation to an understanding of the politics of love. Let's take a moment to look at each one. Truth. The normative truth about what is ethical to do to animals is in fact an untruth. As historian Keith Thomas notes in Man and the Natural World, society's relationship with animals is built on a mixture of compromise and concealment. The concealment is in itself an untruth, in that we name food to hide its true source. A dead pig becomes pork, an infant calf becomes veal, and meat is not identified as the charred remains of dead animal body parts. Truth is the ethical foundation to our relations with animals. Compassion is about extending one's cognitive, emotional, imaginative, and even physical sensibilities to the other being and acting to lessen or end that suffering. In its emphasis on moving from a position of passive interest to engagement, compassion is made more relevant than pity or sympathy. It is compassion's inherent ability to motivate us to do something about the infliction we're encountering that makes it so special and fundamental. Non-violence. Animal abusers have successfully twisted the meaning of violence so that violence is kindness and kindness violence. Hunters don't kill animals, they harvest them. Mice don't give up their lives to science, researchers torture them. Carol Adams calls animals trapped in the animal industrial complex terminal animals. Their days are numbered from before they're born until they're killed. There's an orgy of violence against animals across the globe happening right now. But we can never allow ourselves to act like animal abusers and the animal industrial complex. Their reliance on violence as the norm is no excuse for advocates to behave violently. Only non-violence can effectively confront and expose violence and successfully eradicate it at the roots, regardless of the victims. Justice is usually something we feel the absence of. We're denied it through unfair and unequal treatment, or when we witness someone being subjected to discrimination or oppression. Injustice is often a consequence of a prejudice based on a feeling of superiority, of gender, sexual orientation, race, or species. It occurs when we're indifferent to the plight of others and fail to recognize the truth of the circumstances. Justice is never won easily. Authority would prefer to ignore injustice rather than confront it. Power control are never relinquished readily. The case has to be made, the work has to be done, people and their elected representatives need to be convinced over many years, if not generations, through several stages. Justice is our commitment to animals. Further to my understanding of animal rights, I want to say something briefly about animal ethics, the various philosophical ways our relationship with animals are interpreted. I'm fortunate to have witnessed and learned from the publication of Peter Singer's Animal Liberation in 1975 that put the utilitarian perspective. Tom Reagan's Case for Animal Rights in 1983 that argued for a deontological rights-based view, and such key ecofeminist works which advocate the ethics of care as Carol Adams's Sexual Politics of Meat in 1990 and Laurie Gruen's Entangled Empathy in 2015. For many years I identified as a utilitarian, and Singer's work, particularly practical ethics, spoke for me. Then Reagan's critique of utilitarianism and rights-based view convinced me that this was how to understand animal rights. Then the ecofeminists convincingly challenged the utilitarian and deontological arguments and put forward their case for the ethics of care. Who knows what will be next in animal ethics? Nonetheless, I conclude that no one single theory in animal ethics successfully holds all the arguments for animal rights. Utilitarianism and its companion effective altruism that finds only a monetary value in philanthropy no longer rings true for me. That's a sure bet that I now have. So in the political domain, I am a rights advocate for animals, strongly influenced by the work of Will Kimlicka and Sue Donaldson in their book Zoopolis. In all other respects, I find myself drawn to the ecofeminists and their ethics of care for its holistic and caring approach. My 4 key values in animal rights don't embrace any one theory in animal ethics. However, I recognise they're more informed by Reagan's rights-based perspective and the ecofeminist ethics of care than anything else. So my task today was to explain why I believe the politics of love should embrace animal rights and vegan cruelty-free living as integral to its ethos, and why animal rights is a way of life based on the politics of love. I've sought to explain to you that my understanding of the key values in animal rights are truth, compassion, non-violence, and justice. Further, these key values define my understanding of the politics of love. This is the extent that even this evangelical is at heart an animal lover. The politics of love and animal rights is not a question of whether animals can love each other, as I'm sure they do, or whether they can love us. I know that Buber did, but can we love them? The question is not can they love each other, nor can they love us, but can we love them? And apologies to Bentham in that remark. But how am I left with my dilemma of being a grumpy vegan, a misanthropist? The only remedy I know to my perpetual state of melancholy is to never give up. It's to aspire to a Buddhist monk, and I'm going to mangle this word, Avalokitesvara, who forego their earned opportunity to advance to nirvana, all the while someone else needed their help. Now my feet are firmly made of clay. I fear my heart all often turns to stone. Often I look away. But isn't this what the politics of love means? A life dedicated to helping others? But isn't this what the politics of love means? A life dedicated to helping others? This is the only life that's worth living, a life dedicated to others, regardless of whom and any rewards it may bring. Whether we believe our ultimate destination is heaven or hell, nirvana, or some other place, it doesn't matter. It's the journey, not the destination, that counts. It took me decades to discover and understand what I'm trying to present to you now. Along the way, I had to learn how to feel honestly, compassionately, peacefully, and justly about myself. I tried to make sense of a lifetime of working for animals, to discover a deeper understanding of what caring profoundly for them meant. Living as a vegan is both a political and loving act. Political in that it is driven by a desire to change societal norms through organised means. Loving in that the desired changes are based upon emotional, feeling experiences between individuals regardless of species. I have told you that the key values of animal rights are truth, compassion, non-violence and justice. I believe they can and should also be the key values of the politics of love, both in theory and practice. Thank you.
Questions?
Oh dear.
Well, I have a question too. Oh, actually, Julia has a question.
I'll take up space. Kia ora mātua, thank you for your talk. I was just wondering, interested that one of your values is non-violence, and just in terms of a value, that's a absence of something negative as opposed to something more than that, and how you define that was around the relationship, how we relate to animals and the relationship there. So just why you chose non-violence as a value.
I wish there was another word in the English language that I could use, but I don't know what that word is yet. Ahimsa is usually the other word that does get drawn to be defined as non-violence. I agree, it is problematic, but in short of wanting for something else, I don't know what else to use.
For example, like respect, so it could be between us as a species and animals as a species, as opposed to no violence.
Respect, I do use respect a lot in my work, but I don't think respect really addresses the issue of violence. Animals are violently treated. We don't see it as violence, but it is violence. And I think it's important, if I were to take out non-violence and put in respect, I don't think it would address the violence to the animal issue that happens. I appreciate your comment very much.
Yeah.
I wish I knew another word to use, because I would use it if I could find it, but I haven't found it yet. But I take your point.
Other questions? Yes.
Don't ask him.
So you had asked earlier about climate change, and I'm just wondering how you respond to people that say, it's important to be concerned about animals, but we've got this pressing problem of climate change, we have humanitarian crises that we should be focusing on. So I guess it's a question of priorities, like how does the animal protection issue fit in? Is that an issue?
Well, the brief I got from Philip and Max was to talk about animals and not climate change. I'm very happy to sit here and stand here in front of you and talk about climate change. Briefly, they're interrelated. You can't separate the two out. They are completely and utterly interrelated. The thing about climate change is that it's the common denominator to everything that we face. And in tackling the animal issue, we help to tackle the issue of climate change. For all the things that we should now know by now, that animals don't produce food. They cause tremendous impact upon the climate, on the environment. So I don't like. Yes, I did say this morning that climate change was the single greatest thing that we face. And I think in a way that it is, because we are on this planet. It's the planet that's at risk. It's the planet's the common denominator there. In my work is more passionately involved with helping animals, and I'm a great advocate for the environment as well. But you can't separate them out. And I was asked just to talk about animals today, so that's my defence, prosecutor. He's an attorney, by the way.
Another question?
Hi. A couple of years ago, I saw a lecture by somebody whose name I can't remember, so this is a terrible question, but I apologise for that. But she was speaking to the issue of the number of zoos that there are in the Gaza Strip. So there's something like 12 zoos in the Gaza Strip. And every time an animal in one of the zoos in the Gaza Strip is killed, the Western press are very, very upset about it and publish a great deal of sort of polemics about the fact that the Palestinians continue to run these zoos. And her point obviously was, why are we as a society more interested in the deaths of these animals within these zoos than we are in the daily deaths of the Palestinians? Now, I don't want to say that I think that we should develop a hierarchy of life, but I'm wondering whether or not we can learn anything for the politics of love through the way that we sometimes love animals and through the way that we sometimes elevate animals above the lives of human beings. And whether or not you, from your sort of animal-loving position, could draw anything from that.
The lesson I draw from that is that the media doesn't really care about the animals in the zoos in the Gaza Strip. It is just it's a vehicle for them to have a go at the people in those countries, and it's a deeply cynical ploy on their part. I think they take information from animal groups and use them to populate the pages and the web pages of their websites, and I think people genuinely are interested in it and respond to them. But there's with the animal issue, there's the number of themes that reoccur, whereby it's always something's more important than something else, or why are you doing this when you should be doing something else, and they happen all the time. The position I hold about zoos is that zoos are prisons for animals, and that they should not exist, and they should be either eliminated or converted into being sanctuaries for animals. And the trade in animals for zoos is a horrific trade. And there's a very good book by the artist Sue Coe called, she's forgotten it already, Zoicide, that I would highly recommend. Generally speaking, there's an industry of animals and entertainment, and I would put zoos under the category of animals and entertainment, because they like to position themselves as learning establishments, but studies of people going to zoos don't treat them as places of education. They're places of entertainment. Have I answered your question?
Not really, but that was a lovely answer.
Well, let's talk afterwards, and I'll have another shot.
Okay.